created a lot of opportunity and the Chinese have taken advantage of it, basically, is how I would put it. And then the system itself creates a lot of opportunity because it just keeps getting more and more. They just keep adding things to their portfolio at the United Nations. And the Chinese can kind of throw a lot of, there's a saying in security in the military that, quantity has a quality all of its own. And China has quantity. They can throw a lot of people at the United Nations, and a lot of state-directed resources that the U.S., they do things in a way that works within the grain at the UN, whereas we are when we are constantly trying to get the UN to eat its vegetables, even under democratic administrations, more so than most countries, because we are the biggest contributor, and so we are the ones who are most concerned about waste, fraud, and abuse, for instance. Whereas if you aren't contributing as much as we are, you're not as concerned about waste, fraud, and abuse. And if you're China, you're like, ooh, waste, fraud, and abuse, opportunity for us. So it's, we have totally different approaches to these institutions.
Wow. It's just crazy. Like China, you can kind of see it's the whole, like, let's make a lot of cheap crap, but then like repositioned as like that, but throwing that approach at this most important global institution, and corrupting it in like every level. And just like what you said about them phrasing, like they can phrase everything in the way like, oh, sustainable development goals that they have no intention of meeting, but they have. It's like,
unless it's beneficial to them.
When Trump said that he had all the best words, he was wrong. It seems like China has the best words.
I mean, what you said about the sustainable development goals being the same as the Belt and Road, that's just...
Come on, how do you not see that?
My brain wants to explode.
Yeah, well, it's one thing for China to say it, right? But what they were able to do was get the UN itself to say it. They were putting this into UN resolutions. And for years, for like 3 or 4 years, the United States did nothing about it. We came in and we're like, this is going to stop now. We will not be making references to Belt and Road or Xi Jinping thought principles in UN resolutions. And so we would start calling votes on stuff, and people were like, what are you doing? This is a consensus resolution. I'm like, no, it's not. It's got, Xi Jinping thought in it. And they're like, what are you talking about? And we're like, that whole, community of shared future for all mankind that the Chinese asked you to put in this resolution on the decade of the family farmer, that's like not going to happen. They're like, again, it was like, we were alone at first. And then we started to get, others to understand that it was a problem by going in and saying, look, we're not asking you to put in the thoughts of Donald J. Trump into a UN resolution. That would be super weird and inappropriate. So why do you think it's okay to put Xi Jinping thought into this resolution on the decade of the family farmer? Like, this just doesn't make any sense.
It seems like China is trying to use the UN as a way for it to govern the whole world.
You think? Ding, ding, ding. Yes, this is what the Global Development Initiative, the Global Security Initiative, and the Global Civilization Initiative, the 3 pillars of Xi Jinping's foreign policy approach, are all about. And that's when they talk about making the UN the center of the multilateral, of the multilateral system with the UN at the center. That is exactly what they mean, because they want to instrumentalize the UN as a tool for expanding their governance model, for propagating their governance and security model, which is the securitization of everything, and their civilizational model, which is a statist and authoritarian model. So yes.
Right. And that's what they mean by a shared future for all mankind. We all get to share in that future.
It's not a lie. It's not a lie.
And it's their future, and they're going to decide what it is and who gets to benefit from it in the mutually beneficial way.
At least America gets to pay for it.
Well,
yeah.
Well, so that's my question. Like, what is the purpose of the UN anymore? Why doesn't the U.S. just pull all the funding or get out? Like, what is it doing anymore?
I think those are very good questions to ask. And I just, when I testified on this subject in the House a few months ago, I kind of am like, we need to actually start asking, what is this for? Like, what is the UN for? And we need to start looking. I mean, this was something that Nikki Haley was very insistent on. When something would come in, some initiative, we're like, okay, what is the value proposition for the American people here? And why would why would our taxpayer dollars, why should they be used to support whatever this is that's coming in? And this was the right question. And I think we went for so long without asking it, and now we're doing all of this stuff, and it's like, and I think that there was an assumption for a long time that we got more out of combining our resources with our allies and putting it all behind the UN, behind a UN agency, and having them go out and do, the World Food Program or UNICEF. And these are agencies where Americans are at the head of the agency, and they do good work, or that working through UNHCR meant that the United States didn't directly have to help all those refugees because UNHCR was there doing it. But at a certain point, the value proposition gets turned on its head. And if we're not getting, if not only are we not getting credit on the ground from the beneficiaries of this assistance, but we are giving all of this money to these organizations, which then turn around and attack us every day as evil and as the problem. I think that we've lost the thread on what the value proposition is here, and the American taxpayers are not going to put up with it. I mean, I think that this is, and especially in an era of great power competition, where you have China and Russia and other rogue states like Iran and North Korea bandwagoning together. You see them at the BRICS. You see Antonio Gutierrez at the BRICS forum this week in Russia, being hosted by Vladimir Putin, war criminal who invaded a sovereign UN member state on the most specious of grounds. And he's hosting the Secretary General as if everything is fine. And with Xi Jinping standing there next to him, and the two of them talking about, how they've got opportunities unseen in 100 years to reshape the global system, and that they will be doing it together. And Antonio Gutierrez just sitting there lapping it all up and, eating cake with them. This is not for us at this point. And I'm not really sure how well it's serving the developing countries and the people in conflict affected countries at this point either, because you don't see the UN doing a very good job of mediation, of peace building. The more corrupted it becomes through the influence of these hostile and malign countries, the worse it gets at doing its basic functions. So I think that, like you said, at least we get to pay for it. I think that gravy train has got to stop, and we've got to really seriously reevaluate, and we've got to be pretty hard-headed about where we're putting our resources um, at this point, in order to evaluate whether it still makes sense and whether we are getting a positive value add from going through these UN agencies rather than just doing things bilaterally or in many-lateral ways.
I think it's interesting when you talk about like the value proposition to the American people, because I think most Americans don't really think about the UN, right? Like, who thinks about the UN? If you think about them, maybe you think that they're like feeding starving children in Africa, or, doing like the UNICEF or some of these things, but you don't really think about what they're doing on that global governance model that you're talking about, that the Chinese Communist is like hijacking.
Yeah, you don't think about the 39 floors of UN bureaucrats making, healthy six-figure salaries that allow them to live in Midtown Manhattan and send their kids to private school for free up through college, on the taxpayer dime, and who are, doing this in concert with the authoritarian government of the People's Republic of China. And I think that one of the things that I would say to my colleagues when I was in New York was, look, if the United Nations disappeared off the face of the earth tomorrow, it would not matter to the American people, because we do not rely on the United Nations to secure our nation. We do not rely on the United Nations for our economic development. And we do not rely on the United Nations to protect the human rights of the citizens of the United States of America. But your country, you rely on the United Nations to actually perform services and functions, and you need it to be effective. Is that what's happening here? Like, aren't you concerned about the fact that you see that this organization is a meaningful service provider for you and it sucks? I mean, like, doesn't that concern you at all? And so, I mean, it was a little bit more diplomatic than that, but talking to developing countries that actually do rely on technical assistance and other forms of support from the United Nations in very kind of pragmatic ways about, you actually need this place to work. And, here's a fun fact. What China is doing here is making it less effective, less efficient, less competent, because that's what they want. They want this entity to be more wasteful, more corrupt, and easier for them to manipulate.